They did attack the house, enter the house, and brutally killed the appointed governor, Charles Bent, and even scalped him. The judge for the trial, his son was one of the individuals that had died in the violence. You could call it a mock trial or kangaroo court, whatever, but it was a trial that was held, and they were convicted and sentenced to hang on the Taos Plaza, which is where we are standing now.
Hi, welcome to Death Row Stories. I'm in Taos, New Mexico, and this was the house of the United States Governor of New Mexico Territory. His name was Charles Bent. In 1847, indigenous and Hispano rebels came here, shot him with arrows, and scalped him in front of his family. Several days after he died, 28 people were executed on Taos Main Square. This episode of US history is called the Taos Revolt, but it might not be a great name. I'm heading to the Central Square to meet Bob Romero. He was president of the Taos County Historical Society, and he wrote a history book about Taos.
Hanged in the square, America's forgotten mass execution. Taos Plaza, 1847, rebels rose in defiance. Scalped the governor, arrows flying, sparks of resistance.
Hello,
US cannons
Bob.
roared, kangaroo
Hello.
court
Thank
sealed
you
their
very
fate.
much for
28
receiving me
swung from
here
trees,
on the
history's
Central
hidden
Square
hate.
of Taos.
What do you think of the plaza?
It's magnificent. These adobe buildings, they're really very nice. I came here already 2 or 3 times, and I really love that city. But what most of the people and most of the tourists don't know is that about 28 people, we don't know exactly how many, were executed on that square, right?
Correct. That's an event that happened, and not real well-known event around the country, but in New Mexico it is known. In particular in Taos, it's an event that still people talk about and have questions about.
Nothing is left from those executions because they were not hanged on these trees, right?
No, these trees are more recent than that far back, but trees similar to what exists today were used for those hangings.
First question, in which country were we here in 1847?
We were still under the sovereignty of Mexico, even though the United States had invaded New Mexico in the summer of 1846 and had taken military control over New Mexico.
This territory will become officially American only 1 year later in February 1848, right?
Correct. In February 2nd of 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed to conclude the Mexican-American War that had started in 1846.
When we were under the Mexican rule here, what was the relationship between what we call the Hispanos and the Native Americans, and in particular, the Pueblo people?
There was a very cordial relationship that existed because the century before that, the area had been under severe attacks by the nomadic tribes, including the Comanche, Apache, Navajo, and Ute. And so the people here banded together, the people from the Pueblo and the Hispanos from Taos and northern New Mexico to as part of their security to protect themselves.
In January 1847, indigenous and Hispanos joined to protest. Can you tell us what happened exactly?
There were some concerns about what had happened with the invasion of the Army of the West in June of 1846. A group that was led by Tomasito Romero from the Taos Pueblo and a group from the downtown area here in Taos led by Pablo Montoya got together to protest some of the concerns that they had. I guess you could have considered them a very irate group of people, and Governor Bent had just arrived from Santa Fe. He had just been named the first American governor shortly after the invasion of 46. And so they went to the governor's house. His wife was there and family. And so they did attack the house, enter the house, and brutally killed the appointed governor, Charles Bent, and even scalped him. And several other individuals were also killed at that time. So that was what started the precipitated the violence, and then it would continue.
During all these events, how many people were protesting against the United States?
There were quite a lot, uh, up to as much as 1,000 people gathered together later on in after the initial events that actually were formed into a military group at that time. So the actual active people were over 1,000, but the sentiment was throughout the community and concerns about what was going on.
Let's talk about the different reasons that led these people to protest and to kill the US governor. First of all, there was maybe a national pride. They felt they were invaded by a foreign country.
Pride was definitely a part of it because when Stephen Watts Kearny had come in with Army of the West in June of '46, there was no resistance. The sitting governor then, Manuel Armijo, actually decided to flee south to Mexico and took even military personnel with him and his family. And so he left New Mexico defenseless. So that's why in the history accounts it stated that Kearny took over New Mexico without firing a shot. But there were sentiments against it and protests, and there were concerns particularly around just general opposition to American occupation, but also there was opposition to a lot of the land grant scheming that was taking place because land grants had been issued by the Spanish government and Mexico since beginning in the 1600s and 1700s. And these land grants were used by the families to work their lands and the livestock communally. And so there were concerns that these lands were being usurped by the newcomers into the area as far back as the Mexican period, not just in the 1840s. So that was one concern. And the second reason or major concern was the bootlegging of alcohol, the Taos whiskey that was taking place at the Turnley Mill particularly. It was a distilled mill alcohol that was being produced out of wheat and corn and then being distributed. And it was impacting the community, particularly at the Taos Pueblo. There was a big concern about that.
Why was it a concern for the locals?
Well, just the impact on the community of having adverse effects of people drinking the product and causing problems within the community, within the families.
And what is the third reason of those riots, protests?
The third reason was around the duties and taxes that were being imposed by the Mexican government on products coming into New Mexico. Because prior to Mexican sovereignty, which happened in 1821 with Mexican independence from Spain, Spain controlled its borders very strictly and rigidly and didn't allow goods to come in. But in 1821, two simultaneous events happened. It was the Declaration of Independence, the completion of the independence of Mexico from Spain, and the opening of the Santa Fe Trail. So basically, that's when these import goods started coming down the Santa Fe Trail. And it included some good projects, some good products like glass and metal tools and whatnot. But the main point is that the Mexican government imposed duties and tariffs and excise taxes on these goods coming in. But what would happen is they would come down Santa Fe Trail into Las Vegas, and they wouldn't go to Santa Fe. And so they were able to bring these products into Taos without paying these taxes. Avoidance of paying these is what was happening.
American people were bringing things here without paying any taxes, right?
Well, if they got to Santa Fe, the duties were usually collected, but there were other ways that they were using to get around paying these taxes. It was protesting the avoidance of paying the taxes by the Americans coming in with their supply wagons.
How did the U.S. Army react to this killing and those protests?
Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny had come into New Mexico in June, but his orders were really to continue on to California to also take and conquer California, which ultimately did happen also. But he left Colonel Sterling Price in charge of the military in Santa Fe. So a group from Santa Fe were formed after the event in Taos on January 14th, 1847. And it included military Missouri volunteers, mountain men, and it was about a group of 250 to 300. And they came into Taos early February, and there were about 2 feet of snow on the ground, so it wasn't easy to get up here. But they made it here, including bringing howitzer cannon that could fire 8-pound cannonballs. And so they had a lot of heavy artillery with them, and came into Taos. And on February 3rd of 1847, they marched to the Pueblo. And it's interesting that they didn't just stop here in Taos at the plaza, or even in Ranchos, where there is a big church also. But they marched to the Pueblo, and there was a day or two of some military action. But then they, at one point, began to bomb the church at the Pueblo, the San Jeronimo Mission Church. And many people died, including women and children. And that pretty much ended the violent events that occurred, at least in Taos.
But ultimately, there was also a trial, right?
Yes. In the aftermath, it was a couple months later, actually, in April, that the trials took place. I guess some also in February. But a number of men, particularly the ringleaders, were rounded up and put on trial. It wasn't what we would consider a trial that we would expect under the Constitution of the United States, so guaranteeing a trial by jury and a trial by your peers. But a trial was held, and most of the individuals were charged with murder, but there was one individual who was tried for treason, which was interesting because we were still under Mexican sovereignty at that time. All the people here were still Mexican citizens until not just the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in February 2nd, 1848, but according to the treaty, it was 1 year later they would become citizens. So the person should never have been tried for treason, but he was, and the rest were tried for murder.
For the murder of the governor.
Murder of the governor and other individuals that died, and there were about 6 or 7 in the Taos area. But that's the interesting part too, because the judge for the trial was a man by the name of Charles Carlos Bobian, and his son, Narcisco Bobian, was one of the individuals that had died in the violence. And the foreman for the jury was a man by the name of George Bent, who was brother to the then governor, Charles Bent. You could call it a mock trial or kangaroo court, whatever, but it was a trial that was held, and they were convicted and sentenced to hang on the Taos Plaza, which is where we are standing now.
Montoya was the leader of the Hispano population. Was he executed here?
Yes, he would have been one of the individuals, Pablo Montoya, who was executed here on the Taos Plaza in April of 1847.
Romero was the leader of the Pueblo people, the indigenous people, and he was not executed here after the trial. He was shot in the prison, right?
Tomasito Romero was actually shot right across the street in the jail at that time, before he was even actually tried. But he died. The official account was that he made an attempt to escape and was shot in that effort.
Why do you call this event the Taos Revolt / Resistance? Why not the Taos Revolt, as it's commonly named?
If you look at it, it doesn't fit the definition of a revolt, because a revolt is an uprising against the sitting government. At that time, it was Mexico. So this one wasn't against Mexico. The 1837 revolt was, but this one was against the American invasion of 1846. And therefore, people here weren't citizens of the United States yet, and the sovereignty had not changed yet. It would later.
Does the local population remember these events today?
They do, and more so when you look at New Mexico history, and Taos history, if they're particularly interested in studying it. There are a number of books. I have my own book, several books I have reviewed and researched more about this event in 1847. But on a national level, it's not very well known.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this short episode. I thought it was interesting for a change to explore the death penalty through the lens of this unique US history event. I can produce new videos, but I need your help to bring them to a wider audience. So please subscribe to the channel, share them, like them, comment them. If you're listening to the podcast, it's also important that you subscribe. Thank you so much for being part of this project. See you.
Hanged in the square, America's forgotten mass execution. Taos Plaza, 1847, rebels rose in defiance. Scalped the governor, arrows flying, sparks of resistance. U.S. cannons roared, kangaroo court sealed their fate. 28 swung from trees, history's hidden hate.